Hello everyone, this is Rehan Siddiqui, and today we are going to cover the guidance that is provided by the examiner in in their examiner's report for the March June 2022 attempt. This is the latest examiner's report that they have provided for students to learn basically from their past mistakes that the examiner has noted and improve on the answers uh, in the upcoming attempts. Now, this session is basically going to focus on the highlights and whatever we can grasp in this short video. So let's move on directly. I would advise that you guys open up your exam questions from the practice platform and keep them in front of you, especially those who are repeating in this September 2022 attempt, and also those who are going for the September attempt as a new attempt. So it's always good to know that in a recent exam, what uh, challenges or what limitations examiner has highlighted when it comes to the failure reasons, when it comes to the performance issues of the students in the answers. So let's move on. First, there is a general content. You can also download this report from the ACCA website for ACCA Advanced Performance Management exam. Um, if we move on, they are just giving you a brief introduction to the paper and where you can find the questions and answers. This was the first question. I would have to zoom it in quite a little bit to know for you guys to see this thing. Um, the first requirement for this 50-mark question previously, now you should know that for these professional marks are 10, and in total there are 20 professional marks for your professional skills. So till June there were only 4 marks, but rest remains the same. So there was a question for writing a report to the board to respond to the CEO's instructions for work on the following areas. One was divisional performance measurement, BCG analysis, management information. Now let's see what examiner has to say when it comes to the issues noted. I will just be briefly highlighting all those areas and giving you advice as to what should be done, although the advice will be here in the report as well. But it's good to have a little discussion because these things remain unnoticed usually when a student is preparing for the exam attempt. In the general comments, if you notice, they are saying that many candidates score well on individual sections of this question but appear to struggle to score well on all three in one script. It is recommended by the examining team that candidates prepare for questions by reviewing questions from previous exam sittings that cover multiple topics, noting that questions are based on application and not simply knowledge base. Now, more often, my discussion with the students remain on this thing that although the topics are simple to understand, maybe you can memorize the theories, the models which we are discussing in this exam, but there is very little scope of marks when it comes to just presenting the examiner with same knowledge, same theory that is in the books. You have to make sure that you apply the knowledge. As you will see in the further comments of examiner, most of their issues which examiner will say will be related with the application part rather than other technical areas. So we need to learn this art. If you have not still practiced this thing, you have to make sure that whatever advantage it is, whatever feature of the model is, whatever limitation it is, you have to tell examiner how it will be a limitation for the company in the question. So the first requirement for 16 marks was for the divisional performance measurement. Uh, the examiner is saying that most candidates successfully attempted three the calculations ROI RI for three divisions. A minority of candidates did not seem to be able to do this correctly. Now, at this level, APM level, we cannot afford to miss out these simple marks. So make sure that you remember how to calculate ROI and RI. However, a significant number of candidates only calculated ROI and RI once for each division. Now this is not a new question related with ROI and RI. If you go on and study your past papers, you will find that this sort of a question related to the controllable and uncontrollable factors, and the CEO expecting you to calculate the ROI and RI for different situations. If we put in controllable factors, if we don't put in controllable factors, or if we cherry pick some controllable factors and exclude others, whatever are given in the scenario, what will be the different results of the ROI and RI. So make sure that you are not doing this in your answers. The final part of this question was attempted relatively well by candidates. Some candidates did not attempt it at all. Now you need to go on into the requirement and see what CEO was expecting you to do, but leaving the requirement in the exam is not at all advisable. Although it may, for some time management reasons, you may skip some of the requirements, but it is highly advisable that you guys go on and at least attempt it. Let it be for one number, but don't leave it altogether. Why? Because now you have professional marks, and there are marks for addressing, jotting down the headings as well as your structure. So make sure the structure is there, presentation is there, completeness is there. Let it be for 1 mark out of 5 or 4, whatever you are leaving, but let the presence be there. It's just like a CEO of your company asking you to do something, and because you don't know something, you don't even address it at all in the presentation. It will look very awkward. So make sure that even if it is not about the technical marks, you are going for the professional marks. Part 2 related with BCG. In this part of the question, candidates were required to assess how the BCG could be used to assist generally in performance management and to recommend KPIs based on the BCG analysis given for each division. Now, there was an expectation of performance management benefits basically, or the uses which could be made of BCG, and then recommend KPIs based on BCG analysis. So this is one of your skills, that whatever performance management models we have, make sure that you learn the art of generating critical success factors and KPIs out of it, so that whenever a model comes in a question and asks you to do KPIs, you are able to think in that mind frame. Remember, these models originally were not designed for these purposes. This is the adaptive purpose that APM syllabus is allowing you to do, and this is how it goes on in the real world as well. So several candidates wasted valuable time explaining how the BCG worked. That is identifying market share, market growth for each division, and some went on to state whether where each division would be placed in the matrix and why, even though this information was given in the scenario. So we call it mere repetition of the facts which are already there in the scenario. There is no point addition to the purpose which CEO is expecting you to do. Phrases such as how it could be useful should encourage candidates to discuss the benefits to the company of using this model. Each of the divisions in the scenario face different conditions, and once analyzed using the BCG, need to have different objectives and as such be appraised using different metrics. The second part of part 2 required justified KPIs for each divisions. Now remember this thing, although here they are categorically mentioning justified KPIs, but whenever there is a KPI question or even a critical success factor or KPI both combination question, there has to be justification. Without justification, um, there won't be sufficient marks. So always remember that there will always be a proper business case which should justify the use of critical success factor for the company in the question as well as KPIs. Without justification, any suggestion is a hunch and may go good or may go bad for the marks. In order to simplify your thought process, you can always think about uh, a critical success factor that is suitable for the organization in the question according to their circumstances, uh, as well as same goes with the KPIs. Something that is suitable for the critical success factors is okay, and a KPI should also be acceptable. So anything that you are trying to measure is not going to be acceptable by the people who are going to get measured on this KPI will again not be a feasible suggestion for the exam question. Do give this section a read. It has valuable suggestions which you can adhere to so that you can score nicely whenever such a question pops up in the exam. Write a report to the board of CE to respond to the CEO's instructions for work on the following areas. Management information. These management information questions are a routine part of your exam questions. Make sure that you are excellent in these areas because these are easy marks if your syllabus coverage is 100%. So as long as you know the purpose and how they can be examined, there are very less chances that you should not score good in this section. The first part of the requirement was asking for an explanation of the aims of the information. Many candidates, however, discuss the types of information. So it is important also to read the requirement carefully so that you do not misinterpret the exact requirement of the CEO in the question. Now, this problem with this question requirement understanding is not new. Since this exam was launched in ACCA stream 2007, it is there, and for the first time this problem was related with the questions of management information way back in 2014. Since then, these questions of management information are a regular part of your exam questions till date. And if you go on and dig out all the examiners' feedback till date, this is what the problem is, that understanding of the requirements is not good. Simply put, in a question where examiner is asking about evaluate management information report. Now, this simple requirement, evaluate management information report, simply means you have to evaluate this report that is given in the appendix and whether it fulfills the content that the syllabus is teaching you itself, that what are the qualitative features of a good quality information system inside an organization. Now, this till date is an issue because students try to evaluate the performance, which is their key skill basically. So, what the students are doing is they evaluate the performance of the company through the data that is given in appendix, which is a complete misinterpretation of the exam requirement that is there. So it's important that you are understanding the exam requirements nicely. In the second part of the requirement, candidates were firstly required to explain the qualities of good information and then explain how it can improve communication. Many candidates remembered correctly the qualities, but some simply listed these with no explanation of what they meant or how they could be used. So simple repetition of book knowledge will not help. You have to make sure that how basically that information is related with your syllabus, with your scenarios, with your questions. If you see the conclusion, overall, it was the application that made the difference between those candidates scoring well and those who did not, which simply means that examiner is saying that people know the syllabus, and it is nowadays becoming more and more achievable as well because it's a small course to remember. People know the syllabus, the problem is application. So you know BCG metrics, you know value chain analysis, you know best model, you know other things, stakeholder theory, Kaizen costing, target costing, everything you know. But what you don't know is how it will solve the problem presented by the scenario, how it will address the issues raised by CEO. That is what you need to practice when you are practicing. Nowadays, you will be practicing your exam questions mostly. So you need to practice how it is going to help the CEO in solving his concerns, in addressing his concerns. The other question, VAA, required you advice on the criteria for designing a formal transfer pricing policy for its two divisions. Explain the advantages for using market-based transfer pricing. Advise VA on the factors it should be considered while setting international transfer pricing. Now, all these three requirements came from the transfer pricing setting, and uh, if you go down in the examiner's feedback here, uh, much of the concern that the examiner is showing is the uh, lack of knowledge in this area. Transfer pricing has been one of the integral parts of APM syllabus, which pops up most of the time. It pops up in a complete 25 marker question. However, we have seen sub parts also. Now this question, if you see the requirements and if you see the codes of ACCA Advanced Performance Management, this question actually uh, covers up almost 95% of the transfer pricing that is examinable at APM level. So this makes it one of the benchmark questions as well. If you have to practice transfer pricing question, then this is one of the right questions to practice, because it is covering all the aspects of transfer pricing which you need to remember. So it has the criteria as well as transfer pricing strategies, as well as the international transfer pricing issues. Now, although it has this whole structure, one of the challenges that are there in transfer pricing questions is not its requirements usually. The biggest challenge I have seen students facing is uh, the understanding of scenario. So whenever you get a transfer pricing question, make sure that you focus more here, because there will always be very less requirement of writing things. It will not be a big lengthy question. It will only give you a lengthy scenario where the challenge will be to understand who is the buying division, for example, who is the selling division, who is doing what, basically the arrangement. What is the arrangement of this organization? That will be the biggest challenge to get. So you have to make sure that you focus more on understanding the transfer pricing question rather than focusing more on writing. So this question was generally answered quite badly. So this is the overall conclusion, and you can understand that simply people were not able to get the setting in the scenario. In general, candidates seemed at times unclear on the principles underlying transfer pricing and the operation of it as detailed in the question scenario. So the way it is working in the scenario, people were not able to get it nicely. There was lack of application and lack of justification for the suggestions made in any application provided. Um, Several candidates gave lengthy definitions of types of transfer pricing to show that they understood that there were various ways that it could be done, but did not appreciate that this is not what was asked for in any part of the question. So because there was a question and you don't have a choice, that doesn't mean that you do this issue which your syllabus teaches you. Please make the life of examiners, markers easier, and don't do this thing. This is one of the aspects that you should be looking into the management information that is supplied to the company. And this is also one of the things you should avoid while writing your answers. There should only be relevant things. Anything that is irrelevant, you should not be wasting your time as well as the examiner's time on it. It is always helpful for the candidate to demonstrate to the examiner that they understand the terms that are being used in the question. But in this case, when the topic area is one that is core to the exam, it is assumed that candidates know what transfer pricing is. So basically, when we are teaching students, we tell them one technique that, for example, if something new is happening inside an organization like Kaizen, JIT, or maybe building blocks model, balance scorecard model, something like that, like Six Sigma, then it is always advisable that you start with a brief introduction of what these things are. But when it comes to transfer pricing, it's technically, to be very honest, it's not a model in itself. It's basically way of doing something when a division is dealing with another division. Uh, Secondly, it's something which, according to examiner, also this is something that is being with you since past studies from F5 and nowadays known as PM, Performance Management Exam. Secondly, at APM level, examiner is not asking you, expecting also that you should be defining these things. So if you, for example, because it is not a model, when you go on and try to describe what is transfer pricing, then you cannot finish it in 2 3 lines. You will always end up in a long page, maybe 2 pages, and describing what basically transfer pricing has, and then there will be less time remaining for you to address what is exactly required. There was also a general impression that candidates had not allowed enough time to answer the question. And the examiner is saying that maybe this one was the last one out of the three for many candidates. Because of that, people were not able to answer it nicely. Now, there is a specific uh, uh, discussion for each one of these requirements, which I would like you to read carefully if you want to grip the topic of um, transfer pricing. Then this is one of the best uh, insights that you can get. The question, basically, the main crust I will tell you here. Question basically was regarding the criteria. You had to advise on the criteria for designing a formal transfer pricing policy for its two divisions. So the criteria is given to you by your syllabus. If you read out your notes, if you read out BPP exam kit, exam book, you will come across this criteria. Or if you go through some past exam questions, you will come across this criteria. Now this criteria is very simple and very important to learn as well. Otherwise, you cannot suggest anything uh, to the exam question to the CEO. If you are required to suggest a good transfer pricing methodology for the company, you will not be able to suggest it nicely unless and until you don't know this criteria. So examiner is saying here that the people were not aware basically about the criteria for a formal transfer pricing policy. There are some examples of possible responses, ideal responses, which examiner is suggesting here. Do give it a read and compare it with the ones which examiner is mentioning here, so that you can differentiate on the level of depth, on the depth level basically, which examiner is expecting you uh, to have. Examiner is also trying to create your mind frame by asking, you should be asking these questions like, why might autonomy be good? Is it working in this company? It is a good idea to think in terms of identify, explain, apply it to scenario, evaluate if it is likely to be is good or bad, and justify why. Part 3 is probably the longest part of the answers. This, if you do for any question, I believe would be an ideal approach. Explain the advantages of using market-based transfer pricing. Now, this will only be done by those. See, this was also quite poorly done. The main reason will be because you don't know the criteria of an ideal transfer pricing situation. Then let it be any best technique suggested by the examiner or required by you to suggest, you will not be able to justify it properly, because you don't know the criteria. So that is the core thing that you should first know, and then only you can suggest the pros and further limitations for any market based for any transfer pricing policy. See, identify some of the main advantages of market based transfer pricing. Express why the area identified is a disadvantage. Explain how the disadvantage would specifically affect VA situation. So the scenario is leading you towards the disadvantages. If it were the advantages, still the same approach will be applied. Factors it should consider while setting international transfer pricing in relation to the potential acquisition in D-land. Now, there are some general factors which are highlighted by your syllabus. For example, this tax rate, forex, difficulties in communication, some barriers by the government imposed on transferring of the money from one country to another, depending on what scenario gives. These are general ones which you should be able to uh, identify in a transfer pricing setting, and identify the relevant factors, explain why each factor is relevant, and advise as to how the individual factors are likely to affect this company. As long as you meet this criteria, you will be able to nicely score in this sort of a question. Now, the purpose of all this explanation is to make you think in the right direction. Although we may or may not get such a question in the next attempt, that is not guaranteed. Maybe the examiner repeats such a question. But the idea is to generate this mind frame which examiner is trying to create. Last question is related with, let's see, the requirements. Assess the problems which may be faced by B when developing a SLA with go on. Evaluate how the introduction of value-based management would affect the current issues, would affect the current measures in the strategic performance measurement performance report prepared by SPUs, and recommend with justification as to whether VBM should be introduced at B or not. Now, value-based management uh, is being introduced, so any answer definitely should be starting with an introduction. What is VBM? How it is used? Now, how will VBM affect the current measures in the strategic performance report prepared by the SPUs? So whatever measures are there in the appendix 1 here, I need to make sure that how I need to tell examiner how each one of these measures will be impacted if value-based management is used. Secondly, I have to make sure that with justifications as to whether I have to recommend with justifications as to whether VBM should be introduced at B or not. So I have to target B and see in relation to the background mission statement structure of B whether B should be given value-based management or not. Let's see what examiner says here in the overall comments. If you see, the question was generally answered badly. Now, before moving ahead, what are the specific reasons here? Let me tell you one thing, this area, value-based management, underlying this value-based management is the idea of EVA as well, economic value added. That is basically connected with the idea of value-based management. Uh, this area is generally less understood by students, and normally in their preparation they leave it alone. Why? Because it's a small tiny area addressed by the books and the notes. However, its implications, its impact is wider, and if you can see, there is a 25 mark question on value-based management. So you need to keep it in your mind what is value-based management, how it is implemented, what stages are of value-based implementation inside an organization where it happens for the first time. You should prepare yourself for where it is suited, in which organizations it is suited, and what further issues or requirements it may bring in for an organization if they want value-based management to happen. So you need to prepare yourself for this thing. In general, candidates seemed at times very unclear as to what VBM was and therefore found it very difficult to apply it to the company. This is very significant as it is an important part of the syllabus, but also in the specific case of this question, the part on VBM accounted for 60% of the available marks. Candidates spent time in this question offering suggestions in both parts as to what B could undertake to enhance its business performance. There has been an increasing trend to offer this kind of commentary in APM, and on occasion, this can be an appropriate response. However, it is always best to answer the questions that has been asked, and neither part A nor part B of this question asked for business performance evaluation. As we also discussed earlier, that people are fond of analyzing business performance. Much of it is basically due to the past studies they are doing. For example, F7 FR exam, financial reporting exam, previously F7, also gets you towards the world of financial analysis. In your SPR, you may also be doing some financial analysis. In your financial management, you may be doing some financial analysis. In your earlier studies of performance management in F2, uh, you may have come across a lot of bundle of practice for financial analysis. So whenever we see such sort of performance reports which resemble our past studies, we directly jump onto doing those performance evaluations. Why? Because we are master in it and we think that within 5 to 10 minutes we will do it. Regardless of you spend 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and you do 30 mark worth of performance evaluations for the company, if it is not required, it's equal to 0. There is also lack of application in this part of the exam requirement, and lack of justification for the suggestions made. Your application and your suggestion can only be marked by examiner if it is appropriately backed by the justifications and reasoning, because without that, no comment, no application, no suggestion will be worth a mark. The essence of APM is application, not explanation or definition. The question in both its parts seeks to test the candidate's ability to apply the principles and practices of different areas of the SLA and VBM to the specifics of B's situation. A majority of candidates did not fully answer the question. Now just see, if we do analyze the main reasons of someone failing in this attempt, I have one area named as transfer pricing. I have one area named as value-based management, accounting for somewhat roughly 40% of your 40 to 50% of your marks. in an exam setting. Now, these topics, if you go on and see in your overall syllabus, maybe they will be only 10% or 5% max, as far as syllabus area is concerned, but they are accounting for somewhat 40 to 50% in your exam questions. So this is why one thing you should not do is cherry picking. Regardless of you like a topic or not in APM, make sure you touch it and you know basics of it so that you can at least handle it nicely, regardless of its difficulty level in the question. If you cannot handle it properly, if you don't touch it even in your practice throughout your practice sessions that you are taking, then chances are that that topic will come up and cause you a big damage. Remember, you do not have any choice for your exam question. So whatever pops up in the exam question, you have to do it, otherwise there is very less chance for you to survive. Now there is one luck factor known as professional marks worth 20 marks. And if you do practice nicely, follow the desired ingredients of professional marks, there is examiners feedback, guidance on APM related professional marks, which you should see on their website, so in order to know how you need to get them. And if you do well, then they can be the difference between this 49 to 50 marks, or maybe more if you are lucky enough and you practice well. So this can be a big difference, and if you leave them out completely and don't follow that, then there are chances that you may even score 30. So there is a bigger weightage for these marks, and make sure that you practice appropriately for these marks. Prepare yourself well. There is no theory to learn for these marks. It's only a skill set that you need to reflect in your answers. Every requirement will show what professional skills are required, commercial acumen or whatever, and you need to make sure that you reflect that to the examiner in your answers properly. This is foremost one of the key skills, time management. You have to make sure that you don't run out of time on any question. Although there are different strategies, but you must make sure that all exam requirements are given appropriate planning and writing time, because every question will require a dedicated planning time and then a dedicated writing time. Most of the times what happens is that this planning time is so large for one question, so big for one question, that you don't even end up having 15 minutes for the third question as well. So you need to plan yourself properly. There is no point in writing 13 lines for 1 mark. So practice yourself to justify something in 3 lines for 1 mark, or 2 lines maybe max, so that you can spend nice time on every question. Do go through this all specific advice. If you want to practice VBM, if you want to practice transfer pricing, then this exam sitting questions and its answers are a good source for you to practice these things, because the examiner's answer on this VBM and transfer pricing will teach you all the required theory for these topics, which you should keep with you if a question pops up again. So this is it for this examiner's report for June 2022 attempt. Do give it a read as detailed as possible, along with examiner's guidance for September onward attempts related to the professional marks. As long as you read these things, it is uh, there are high chances that you will do good in your exam sittings. Thank you so much for listening this short video. I hope this adds value to your preparation. If there are any questions that you would like to ask, you can reach me out directly through my Facebook page by inboxing me. And even if you want a WhatsApp connection, you can inbox me on my Facebook, and we can remain connected for any of your questions you may have. Thank you so much. Have a nice day ahead.